بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر الخالق البارئ المصور الغفار القهار الوهاب الرزاق الفتاح العليم القابض الباسط الخافض الرافع المعز المذل السميع البصير.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان
Dear respected brothers and sisters, stay with us. We'll be back inshallah with Voice of Islam.
دستورنا القرآن وديننا الإسلام أركانه الجليلة دعائم الفضيلة وهي الشهادتان كعيدة الإيمان والصوم والصلاة.
Basically, in this hour or less in this conversation, I have to share with you what Islam is about and how to think about Islam. And what I'd ask all of you to do is to put your preconceived notions, and all of us have them, about everything, aside. Just pretend that you're like it was attempted that we're on a flight or something. Where you're sitting on a plane, next to you this guy, and you look at his like Abe Lincoln beard and you say, hey, so what's that about? And it's not Halloween, so what is that real? And then you say, and I say, okay, well, I'm Muslim. What's that? Never heard of it. Apparently you don't have CNN, but still. So we're having that kind of a conversation. Let me just tell you some stuff about Islam, okay? And if somebody wants to know about Islam, the first thing they want to know about, or they should know about from a Muslim perspective, what's the priority? Well, what's our faith? And our faith starts with faith in God. So I'll talk a little bit about faith in God himself and what Muslims believe about God. The term God, the closest thing to it in the Arabic language is the word ilah. That's a sacred term. It's used in the declaration of Muslim faith. When somebody converts to Islam or accepts Islam, then they say this phrase, this Arabic phrase, La ilaha illallah, in which there's the term ilah. If you want to write that in English, it would be I-L-A-A-H, ilah. It's pretty easy to pronounce in English, okay? That's the generic term, you would say, closest to the word God in the English language. Now, the word ilah is pretty rich in Arabic because it means a few things. It means an entity that's worthy of worship, a deity. It also means the object of devotion and love. It actually also means someone you turn to in desperate times. It also means someone you are passionately in love with and can't stop thinking about. There's a slew of meaning that comes from the word ilah. And ilah literally also means the thing you lean on, what you lean on. In other words, when you're exhausted, you lean. So what you lean on is God. Now, for a lot of people who don't know that, they ask, well, we believe, or someone from another faith tradition might say, we believe God is love. Do you guys believe that? Well, actually, that's already embedded in the word ilah as we have it in the Arabic language. So oftentimes in translation, it's not put that way for oversimplification purposes. We just say God. But the word God in the Arabic language, and as is used in sacred text, is so rich that if we tried to do that for every word of the Arabic language, we wouldn't actually get a translation. We'd get like 8 synonyms per word, and then move on to and then 8 synonyms. It just wouldn't be functional language anymore. So that sort of thing can only come out in discussion and conversation, not really in translation. So we call him Allah. His name is Allah. That would be spelled in English A-L-L-A-H, an emphasis on the L, okay, Allah. And we don't consider, there's difference of opinion among our scholars about what the word means. Some say it's the original name of God, true to God in all previous scripture as well. Interestingly enough, the Arab Christian tradition, which predates the Muslim tradition of Arabia, has been using the word Allah for God much before Muslims have. So, for example, to this day you will find, for example, Christians in Egypt, you will find Christians in Lebanon, Palestine, other places, and their biblical tradition is actually pretty old. As a matter of fact, our Prophet even met Christians in the city of Najran at one point, and had interchange with them and discussions with them. And actually they as well use the word Allah for God. So it's actually an ancient term for God across cultures. It's not even something limited to Islam. That's the first, or one of the things I wanted to highlight when we talk about the word Allah. Now, what do we believe about this Allah? First of all, we believe that He's one, He's unique, He can't be compared to anything, that there can't be any imagery or something that kind of limits the imagination to what He might look like or what He might be like. We also believe that He has perfect attributes. In other words, if He hears, His hearing is perfect, it's limitless, it's infinite, and it has no beginning and no end. His vision is the same, His wisdom is the same, His knowledge is the same, His power is the same, His mercy is the same, His love is the same. So we attribute three things to every quality of God. So I'd like to highlight those three things so everybody's clear about them. The first of them is that they have no beginning and no end. That God's, like my hearing has a beginning and an end, but God's doesn't. Allah's doesn't. It has no beginning and no end. The second of them is that it's infinite. That mine, for instance, if someone's talking on the other side of this wall, I can't hear, but God's is infinite. It's not. Allah's is infinite. It's unlimited. And the third is that my hearing or my seeing or any of my attributes, for that matter, are granted. In other words, I don't own my hearing. It was given to me. It was a gift granted. My seeing was a gift granted. But His is His own originally. In other words, all other things are granted their qualities from Him. They are a grant from Him, but His are actually originally His own. So just to see if you're still awake out there somewhere in the wilderness, what are those three things that make God's qualities unique? No beginning, no end. Good, that's one. I'll wait. I'll make this awkward. I love making things awkward. This is what I do. Huh?
It's infinite.
It's infinite, sure. Third?
Originally His own. It's granted.
Yep, originally His own. Originally His own, not given to Him by anyone else. Right? So this solves a big theological problem for Muslims, because we say things like a teacher is wise, and we also say God is wise. We say something like, a mother is loving. We also say God is loving. We will say things like, this car is powerful. We'll use the same attribute, powerful, for God. God is powerful. Well, how do we distinguish? Because the language, unfortunately, shares the word with us, with creation, and with God. Well, you keep these three distinctions in mind, and you won't fall into trouble. And what do I mean by falling into trouble is my next point. In any of these attributes of God, first of all, His oneness, His uniqueness, and in any of His other attributes, if the Muslim says that I attribute that sort of perfection in any way to anything else, then I'm committing the highest crime there is, blasphemy. That to the Muslim is blasphemous. You don't attribute that sort of perfection and that sort of limitless power in any way, shape, or form to anybody else except Allah Himself. No one else gets that. Everyone else, that, for example, life, the living. So God's life is infinite, it has no beginning and no end, and it's His own. My life, however, is finite, it has a beginning and an end, and as a matter of fact, it was given to me. Right? So if I attribute eternal life to someone else that has no beginning and no end, or something like that, then I've considered the act of blasphemy. Now, we don't use the word blasphemy in Muslim tradition much. Even Muslims from different cultures use the same Arabic word, and that's another tangential point, but only 18% of Muslims on the planet are Arabs. 82% or more, roughly, are non-Arabs. So this is a religion that spans Europe, Southeast Asia, Asia, the Africas. Obviously, there's a significant population in the West, here in the United States, also Australia. There's about 1 million Muslims in Australia. It's a global phenomenon. And it's not even an ethnic phenomenon. It's not limited to one ethnicity. And for many, many, many centuries, well over a millennium, the majority has been non-Arab. So even though it started in Arabia, the majority of the people that carry the religion, with no political ties to Arabia even, have actually been non-Arabs. Okay? So this act of blasphemy, of attributing something that equates something else to God, is called shirk. I'll spell that out for you too, S-H-I-R-K. So nothing worse for a Muslim, from his faith perspective, nothing worse than shirk. S-H-I-R-K. Sounds like Shrek, so that's easy to remember, right? Nothing worse than Shrek for Muslims. That'd be confusing. But anyway, so that's the first thing about God, His perfection in every possible way, and how we're not supposed to be doing shirk. But that still doesn't answer a very important question. What do Muslims think God wants from them? What do they think God wants? What's their purpose in life? Why do you put them here on the earth? What are they doing here? So a few things that I want to highlight that, again, I think are unique perspectives. Some of these things you might already know, some you may not. So I'm going to just kind of bullet list them, and so you have kind of a concise view of how we see things in our faith tradition as far as our relationship with God is concerned. The first of them is our purpose in life. Our purpose in life is to find God in ourselves and to engage in a continuous struggle to submit to His will, to accept the fact that we were brought on this earth, and the greatest joy we will ever find is to actually be in servitude to Him. If we can find that willingly ourselves, then we have found our purpose in life. Willing, consensual servitude to God in any respect He wants. Now, when we say someone completely submits to someone else, or someone's completely under somebody else's will, then in the social sense, we actually consider that a form of slavery. In any other context, to take God out of the picture, when someone is in complete submission to somebody else's will, they do what somebody else says regardless of what area of life. In our jobs, there's at least a job description. Right? So if you're an accountant, sorry to pick on accountants, then you're only working a certain number of hours, and you're not going to be asked to mop the floor unless the economy is really bad. You're going to be, there's a particular set of things you're supposed to do. Beyond that, if you're told to do them, you say, oh, that's not my job. I'm just an accountant, right? But when you're in absolute submission to another entity's will, in other words, you're in slavery, well, a slave owner can turn to the slave and say what? Mop the floor, do the accounting, wash the windows while you're at it, do my laundry, whatever. He cannot be told, well, that's beyond my job description, right? And obviously, I'm using the term slavery, and it has negative connotations. But I want you to understand something. That in one sense, we do actually proudly accept willing slavery to God as Muslims. We actually call ourselves abd in Arabic, literally meaning slave. I can't give you a politically correct translation. That's what it is. Abd literally means in Arabic, slave. And that is actually the call of God to us, accept yourselves as slaves of mine. Now, the difference, though, is slavery. Let's just compare slavery in every other context and slavery in the Muslim context to God. Slavery is willing or unwilling. Does someone enter into slavery willingly or unwillingly? Unwillingly. It's never like, hey, I've exhausted all other career paths, so might as well. No, it doesn't work that way. Never has, never will. Islam, our slavery to God is already unique because He's saying, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. By the way, whenever I quote something in Arabic, I'll translate immediately. Whoever wants, they can come and believe. Whoever wants, they can walk away. It's your choice. So it's already different because it's willing. Second, a slave would have to be a slave in every matter of life. Right? Everything he does is up to the master's whim. God basically says, it's very beautiful in Islamic literature, the Qur'an says, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, which actually says they do the few good things expected of them. In other words, God didn't make a long, endless list of stuff you got to do. There's a very short list of do's and don'ts. Take care of this and you live your life. Take care of this and everything else, you do however you do it. And even those few things, they're actually very, very few. There are very, very few restrictions, and there are very, very few obligations. You meet those, and you're in the clear. Other than that, enjoy life. Do whatever else you want. And even in those few restrictions, what God continuously explains is He only put them there because not putting them there will put you in harm's way. Our scholars traditionally explain God's restrictions like medication for a sick child. Which child? I have 6 kids myself. Yeah, seriously, 6. What child ever likes to take medication? I mean, honestly. But is it necessary? Yeah, and it's painful sometimes too. And the mother is forcing cough medicine down her son's throat, and he's yelling and screaming, and he's saying, I hate you, Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to me, why would you do this to me, etc. But at the end of all of it, that is an act of love from a mother. It's a painful act of love, but it's still an act of love, because she knows something the child doesn't. She understands something the child doesn't. And in some sense, some of the restrictions of Islam are explained in that way. In other words, عَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. God says, maybe you hate something, but it's good for you. Maybe you really like something, but it's no good for you. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah knows and you don't. Just trust me. So it's not a long list of prohibitions, it's a short list, and outside of that, you're free to live your life. Now, so that's the first thing. The second thing about us and God is that He created two lives for us. There are two lives. There's a life of this world, and there's a life in the afterlife. We believe in an afterlife, heaven and hell, day of judgment. All of our deeds will be presented before God, and people are going to be begging for God's forgiveness. And nobody's actually making it to heaven in Muslim creed unless through God's love and forgiveness. Our deeds alone aren't enough. That's unanimous Muslim creed. Nobody disagrees with this point. The Prophet was explicit in saying this. In other words, we can do all the good we want in the world, it's still not enough. It's going to have to be God's mercy and love at the end that saves us. It's always been this way. This is not a new idea I'm presenting to you. But regardless, there are two lives. One that we live here and one that we live there. What's important to note in Islamic tradition is that God expects us to beautify and build both homes. He expects us, now this is unique, you might not have heard this before. God actually expects us to build both homes. As a matter of fact, yesterday's Friday sermon that I had to do in Plano, I was explaining one single verse of the Qur'an in which the terminology uses وَاسْتَعْمَرَكُمْ فِيهَا. He wanted you to build on the earth. He wanted you to build. And isti'mar is used in Arabic when you build something that lasts a long time, and while you're building it, you don't end up destroying other things. In other words, you build what you would call in the modern sense sustainable societies, eco-friendly societies, societies in which the few that are building major corporations and cities are not doing so at the expense of others that are being economically manipulated, right? So the idea of building something that anybody can benefit from, right? And so God goes out of His way in the Qur'an on countless occasions. It's really hard to put a count on this, to describe how beautiful the earth is, to describe how gorgeous mountains are, what a joy rivers are. What a great thing even, the desert Arabs didn't have a lot of that stuff. So he'd even talk about camels and how awesome they are. And the stars. They really didn't have much else to look at, right? So at least the stars are pretty cool. So he'd talk about the stars. Even you can find beauty too. Even you can find beauty, And so you talk about these things to let us know that the life of this world, worldly existence, is not a curse. We're not damned here. We're blessed here. We're blessed here. Just stay away from these few restrictions, abide by these few regulations, and this world is beautiful. And your job is to make it beautiful and build it. And now, of course, when you build something, when you ask your child, I ask my child, hey, build me a castle. He says, buy me the Legos first. You can't build something until you have the ingredients, right? So he says, وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا أَقْوَاتَهَا in the Qur'an. He put in the earth all of its inherent powers. In other words, all you will need to make this world a beautiful place, for yourself and others, has been put in this earth. And human civilization has been here for quite a long time, and we've had resources enough for everybody. Now, it may not seem that way because of the varying economic situations of many countries, right? And economies, and the first world, second world, and third world, and all of that, right? But from the faith perspective, we believe actually there are enough resources for all human beings to live well on this earth, and live in a healthy and a fair way. So that's our faith perspective on life in this world. You don't choose the next life for this life. You don't abandon the concern for the next life for this life. Either you balance both of them. In other words, we live a spiritual existence while being involved, greatly in this world at the same time. So there's nothing materialistic for a Muslim in, for example, running a multi-million-dollar business. There's nothing wrong with that. However, there is something wrong if that's his goal. So that's the other subtle point. So you can engage in this world, but it can't be your goal. Your goal is higher. Your goal is to do something that benefits others. And your goal is, if you really want to build a home, your goal is to build your real home in heaven. And so all that you do here is only a means to get there. Okay, so do a good job and enjoy it while you're doing it here, But make sure you're building your next life. And what's the easiest way to build your next life? This is another important Islamic concept. It's the concept of what's called sadaqah jariyah, continuous charity. Now what does that mean, continuous charity? It actually means if I leave a good legacy behind, I'm only going to live so many years. I don't know how long I'm going to live. If I can do some acts of good that actually live longer than I do. For instance, I go to a desperate location where education, for example, is a desperate need, and there aren't any resources. And I help set up a school. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, I help set up a school. And the school takes off, and now children are getting a good education, and they're building a better and better society for for the next generation. And this school takes off, and it goes on. It's now 200 years old. I left the world a long time ago. But every student who graduates from that school and does something good in life, I have a share in. I get commission out of that. That's called continuous charity. The Muslims are supposed to build their afterlife, not just through good works of their own, but to invest in opportunities of continual good. And that's how we see preparing ourselves for the next life. Like my motivation to teach, for instance, I was not originally a teacher. I wasn't even a public speaker. I was a nervous wreck when I had to speak in front of people. But this last month I had to give a sermon in front of 15,000 people in Malaysia. That was pretty nerve-wracking. But I've pushed myself in this direction, and my teachers did also. And one of the most motivating instructions or teachings from our religion that pushed me in this direction was a saying of our Prophet, in which he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, خَيْرُكُمْ مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَهُ. The best of you are the ones who learn the Qur'an and teach it. The best people are the ones who learn this book of inspiration and give this inspiration to others so they can do awesome stuff. That's what I've been doing for the last, 12, 15 years. I lost count. That's what I've been doing. I also feel in our next session, not this session, but our next session, I'm going to talk to you about how I believe the Qur'an, one of the most popular books on the planet, like it or not, most popular book on the planet, most well-read by many statisticians, and if not the top, then up there, even if you disagree with the statistics, is actually one of the most misunderstood texts in world history. One of the most misunderstood and underestimated, overlooked, by Muslims and non-Muslims. And I'm going to highlight some of that stuff to you in our next session. Like what do I mean the Qur'an gets overlooked? Or some things in it just people don't even know what's there. Right? So we'll talk about that in the next session. Anyway, coming back to God's expectations from us. The first one was just a few restrictions. Don't do blasphemy. That's one expectation from God, right? The second one is build a good home here so you can build a good home there. And how do you build a good home here? By making sure you do things that benefit not just yourself but others. This is a fundamental concept in Islam. As a matter of fact, there's really beautiful tradition in our history where we believe that there are sayings of the Prophet about the end of times and when there's going to be great war and catastrophe. The biblical version of that is the Armageddon and all of that sort of thing, right? So major catastrophic events happening in the world. And the Prophet said when the Antichrist shows up, and we believe in the Antichrist too, when he shows up and one of you is busy planting a seed. Now, the companions of the Prophet are sitting there listening, the Antichrist has just shown up. The devil manifest. It's come out. Great war is coming. And you were just busy in your backyard doing what? Planting a seed. What should you do? Drop it and run? He goes, no, finish planting the seed. He said, finish planting the seed. Now what does he mean by that? He means don't be overwhelmed by world events. Things are looking pretty bad in the news, and they're going to look worse and worse and worse. And you're going to think, what is my insignificant good deed going to matter? Who's going to benefit from that? Don't underestimate the power of good. Just do it. And you may not even live to see that tree. You may not even live to see it. But the fact that one day that tree might grow, and somebody might sit in its shade. Somebody else might eat from its fruit. Somebody else might take from that fruit and take one of its seed and plant another tree somewhere else. You don't know how this will benefit others and therefore yourself in the afterlife. So don't underestimate it. Right? So we value all good things and we don't get overwhelmed by the negative forces around us. The negative forces in the media around us. For a lot of Muslims, they get overwhelmed. Muslims are getting bashed in the media all the time. I'll give you a crazy perspective. So I went to Qatar in the Gulf states. Some of you might know where that is. So I went to Qatar recently, and I was talking to Qatar TV. And they have this weird impression of what life must be like for Muslims in America. Because the only thing they have in the news from America about Islam is, let's burn a Qur'an, or, somebody flushed it down a toilet, or, Guantanamo Bay, or whatever. They have these weird, that's all they have. They have no other image of what Muslims are like in America. So I'm sitting with this anchor, a TV anchor, who's a British man himself, and he's like, so, life for you lot. You've got concentration camps, do you? I was like, what? What are you talking about? It must be really hard being Muslim in America. I was like, I live in Texas. It was just like, they let you? I had a great kick out of that. You know what's crazy? To them, I'm actually an ambassador of the United States. I have to tell them what life is like in America. Go figure. I have to tell them, no, it's great here. What are you kidding me? We have some of the best mosques and some of the most flourishing Islamic communities and youth groups and educational programs and good relations with churches in our neighborhood. And we got a lot of good stuff going on. But don't they hate you? It's like, some people might, but they don't really show up much. People are curious. People want to know. People like to hear. And I respect those of you that came here. I don't think it's easy. If I only knew about Islam from listening to the radio, if I only knew about, oh my God, if I knew there was a mosque in my neighborhood, I'd move. That's terrifying. So the fact that you're here to me is an act of bravery, honestly. So this world is, I mentioned already, this world is not a punishment. It's a place to live a wonderful life, right? وَجَعَلْنَا لَكُمْ فِيهَا مَعَايِشْ. The Qur'an says we put means in here for you to live well. I already mentioned that to you. Now a little bit about Muslims discussing with people of other faiths. What does God tell us about how we should interact with people of other faiths? This is, again, I think, going to be a unique perspective. I think. I didn't hear it enough. Not from others. So I have to share this with you. So there are two perspectives in Revelation. When I read Revelation, I am a servant of God trying to understand His Word. Much like a Christian would try to understand the Bible. Much like a Jew would try to understand the Torah or the Talmud, etc. Much like that, a Muslim is trying to read the Qur'an and understand God's words to him. He's coming to the book as a humble student, as thirsty for wisdom, thirsty for guidance. That's why we come to sacred text. Okay. God, however, doesn't have to be humble. God's not humble. God's all-powerful. We have to be humble. God's the authority. He can speak how He wants. And He speaks from a position of authority. I mean, look at a courtroom, for example. The judge doesn't speak in a humble way. Who does? The guy taking the testimony at the stand, you understand? Like, he's in a position of judging and authority. He's not going to tone it down. I've been watching Judge Judy since high school. She doesn't tone anything down. You, be quiet. Now the thing is, I'm going to give you this crazy example before I turn to the Qur'an itself to help you understand this perspective. How many kids do I have? Pop quiz. 6. Very good. Okay. 6 kids. One of them got in trouble. And I say, come here, young lady. How come you didn't show me your report card? What's that about? How come your teacher had to call me and tell me? How come I'm talking to her? And she's standing there. I'm so sorry. And then my other daughter walks in and goes, yeah. You should have shown it the first time, young lady. Now at that point, who's also in trouble? Excuse me? When did you become me? Who do you think you are? I speak from a position of authority. And just because she agrees with me or she's my daughter, we have a relationship, does not grant her the same what? Authority. It doesn't. Revelation speaks from authority. The reader of Revelation is not granted that authority. You understand? Now let's talk about an example. God in the Qur'an finds, for instance, and I'm not going to wash it down for you, I'm just going to tell you like it is. God in the Qur'an, for instance, teaches Muslims that attributing a son to God it angers Him. It's beneath Him. that having a child is a quality of creation, and those who say it are engaged in blasphemy. Oh my God, if I tell that to a Christian friend. It's in the Qur'an. I can even cite the verses for you, chapter 19, read the ending. Have fun. Now here's the thing. Here's a story from the prophetic times, just to put things in perspective. A group of Christians heard that a man in Arabia is claiming to be a prophet. Claims that the angel Gabriel came and gave him revelation. And it confirms previous scripture that was given to Moses and Jesus. And talks about all previous prophets that of notice. And especially Arab prophets that aren't even mentioned in the Bible. And says that it's a confirmation of all previous scripture. And he's claiming that this revelation for all those who have previous scripture will find confirmation of their truth in it. So they say, let's check it out. So a group of learned Christians from a place called Najran in Arabia traveled to Medina where the Prophet was to meet with him and say, what are you talking about? We're Christians. We believe in revelation. What is this thing you call revelation? Let us see. Now, they didn't have hotels back then. Those are some really squeaky chairs. Hold on, let the who squeaks end and then I'll talk. Because this is a fun story, I don't want you to be distracted. Okay. So these Christians came and they want to engage the Prophet and his claims in dialogue. They didn't have hotels back then. Guess where they stayed for the few weeks that they were in Medina? In the mosque. They were kept in the mosque. They were guests of the mosque. And they were to pray. Because these are obviously people of religion, people of faith. So on a daily basis, they are going to engage in their Christian acts of worship. Guess where they prayed? In the mosque. By the Prophet's dictate. And guess who they prayed to? Jesus. Openly. Out loud. The companions of the Prophet hearing Jesus being prayed to where? Inside the mosque. Inside the mosque. And the revelation itself says that when anyone says, Ar-Rahman, the most loving, merciful, took a son, the heavens shake. That's how offensive God describes it in the Qur'an. But that's God's perspective. And the Prophet and the companions are just human beings. His wrath cannot turn into what? Our wrath. We still have to deal with our neighbor with love. And what they believe that's between them and God, not between them and us. So God can pass judgments, and He has the power to. He passes judgments in all revelation. Sure. You can disagree with those judgments, and they may be up to discussion. But the fact that we don't have the authority to take that rage and convert it into ours, that's important. Because that to us is blasphemy. Because now you're saying, I share in God's control, in God's authority. Unfortunately, there are people who read God's word in other religions too. And they don't understand this very important point. They start drawing from the authority of God and start exacting that authority for themselves. It's a very tragic thing. And it leads to a lot of hateful speech. All right. We'll do. So, when we study the Qur'an, we study it from the perspective of humble students, was my next point. We understand the Qur'an from the perspective of humble students, not from a position of judging others. That's up to him. Let his revelation judge, between you and him, you work that out. That's not my domain. That's not what I'm there for. Does Islam preach respect for other faiths? A funeral service was passing by and the Prophet was sitting. It was a Jewish girl who died. He stood up. When he stood up, the companion said, why are you standing? It's a Jewish girl. And he said, is she not a human? And he was teaching them. Is she not a child of Adam? And he stood up. And he made them stand. Out of respect. The religion it teaches respect for others. It even teaches respect for people who act ignorantly. Who act or say hateful things. A man shows up to the prophetic mosque. The Prophet's mosque now is one of the most grand structures and most revered, sacred sites for Muslims in the world. At the time the Prophet was still there, a man walks into the mosque, goes in a corner and starts urinating. In his presence. The companions get up and are about to tackle this guy. And he says, wait, let him finish. And the guy finishes. And he's walking away. And he pulled him to the side and said, my dear brother, this place is sacred, we pray here. It would be wise to not do such a thing here in the future. If you could. Nothing else. The guy became Muslim. Because there's a way to deal with others. Now, why am I sharing these stories with you? Because we're living in times of very low tolerance. We're living in times of very, very low tolerance. The first thing needed when you want to understand someone else is you have to humanize them. You have to see them as a decent person. You have to see them as a fellow, not just a fellow human being, in our case, even fellow citizens. People that have the same concerns. People that want the best for their neighborhood, their city, even their country. If you don't see them that way, there's no point in conversation, because the preconceived notions can override any hopes of civil conversation. They override them. They undo them. And so these are a few things that I thought were priority in highlighting in our conversation today. Of course, Muslims pray 5 times a day. We fast in the month of Ramadan. We have this really, really cool ritual called the Hajj. I'd love to tell you all about it. It's the commemoration, it's the celebration of the legacy of Abraham and his sacrifice. Right? Those of you that come from Judeo-Christian backgrounds believe in Abraham and his sacrifice, of the many sacrifices he made for the sake of God. We have this yearly worldwide convention that celebrates his sacrifices. It's called Hajj. We go and we sacrifice animals in the millions and give them in charity in Mecca. We actually go around, if you've seen pictures of Mecca, that house we believe was built by Abraham. The animals we sacrifice are actually a commemoration of the alternate sacrifice he made. We give the animals in charity. And then on top of that, we pass by these 3 places and we pebble. There are 3 monuments, we pebble them. They're considered pebbling the devil. It actually commemorates that when he was taking his son for the sacrifice, the devil came to him 3 times and tried to stop him. And symbolically, he threw pebbles at the devil to shoo it away, because he was going to make a sacrifice for the sake of God. And that's a part of our ritual at Hajj, at that pilgrimage. So actually, Abraham is a really heavy figure in Islamic discourse. We consider ourselves a very Abrahamic faith. Abraham is a very, very, very big deal. And Muhammad himself, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is a descendant of Abraham from the line of Ishmael, which is another fun conversation. But anyway, as I leave you, because in the next session I'm going to talk to you guys about the Qur'an, and now I'll just take open questions from you guys. As I leave you, I just want to say one more thing. Most people don't know. The most talked about person in the Qur'an, is Moses. Moses is a really big deal to us. He's a really big deal to us. And, by the way, far more, and Muhammad, by the way, by name, is only mentioned 4 times in the whole book. Moses, there's over 70 passages about him. You know why I mentioned that? I mentioned that because a lot of people think Muslims are anti-Semitic. They hate Jews. Moses. We can't. The phrase sons of Israel, Israel, we believe is a prophet. His other name is Yaqub, Jacob. He's a revered figure. The word itself, Bani Israel, sons of Israel, is a respected term in the Qur'an. He criticizes some among them for their behavior. That doesn't give anybody license to be anti-Semitic. And this is even a conversation with the Muslims in the audience who don't understand their book properly sometimes. It's not. And the more prophets from the Israelites are talked about in the Qur'an than any other. These are an honored people. God chose them. God gave them great honor by giving them many prophets and many revelations. And they are a huge chunk of our own sacred tradition. They became a necessary part of our sacred tradition. There's no way we can have hateful attitudes towards them as a people. However, what the Qur'an does do, and you might have read it too, it highlights certain bad behavior that some among them did. And the purpose of that is to leave an example. Don't be like that. Don't do what those among them did. And here are the mistakes they made. You don't make those mistakes. That's the purpose of history in the Qur'an. Not to incite hate, but actually to teach lessons. Good role models and bad examples. Both. Learn lessons from the good examples and hear lessons from the bad. And actually some of the heroes mentioned in the Qur'an, non-prophets, are also Israelites. Some non-prophetic heroes. Believers who stood up for the right thing no matter what. And you should learn from them, are actually Jews. They're talked about in the Qur'an. This is in the text itself. I'm not making this up. I can cite it for you. if you're interested in finding out where this stuff is. So that was a little bit of an overview. You are totally free to ask questions, and hopefully they have to do with some things I talked about, but if not, you can just, if you're curious about something else.
دستورنا القرآن وديننا الإسلام أركانه الجليلة دعائم الفضيلة وهي الشهادتان كعيدة الإيمان والصوم والصلاة.
Assalamu alaikum everybody, a quick message from the team at Voice of Islam. Every time our show airs, we reach a potential audience in the hundreds of thousands. We bring the truth about Islam to non-Muslims and help Muslims learn more about their own faith. Every time something positive comes from Voice of Islam being on air, those people who have contributed and made the broadcast possible share in the potential rewards, inshallah. We really appreciate people donating what they can. Every little bit helps us meet the cost of broadcasting each week. We sincerely thank everyone who has helped us and continues to do so, and we look forward to more help in the future, inshallah. If you are keen to contribute, please visit our website for details of how to do so.
Dear respected brothers and sisters, stay with us. We'll be back inshallah with Voice of Islam.
A family who returns from a long holiday only to find that their home has been furnished with new items in a most ordered and perfect manner, and that every detail has been thought of and provided to meet their needs, will be most astonished and affected. They will wonder who arranged this surprise. Of course, it is impossible to stay indifferent to such an astounding surprise. For example, would they really say, "We don't really care how this happened, just as long as it happened"? Or would they suppose that everything happened by itself or by chance, and that the new furniture decided on its own to install itself there? Such ideas are laughable, for all events are the result of a certain intelligence, consciousness, and power that makes them happen. For that reason, the existence of someone who has thought of everything and consciously arranged it is clear. This example also applies to the universe, our world, and all of its living and non-living entities. There are countless, infinitely complex systems and delicate balances in the universe, in all of existence and all phenomena, from the human body to the sky, from animals to the depths of the ocean. Everyone who can think and reason sees that only God, with his superior power and intelligence, could have created these complex systems and delicate balances. brightly colored, sweet-smelling flowers, delicious fruits and vegetables that spring from muddy soil, the sense organs which enable us to enjoy each created item's unique properties, the human body with its many complex systems, all of which work in harmony, the sun, which illuminates and warm, and its ideal size and distance from our earth, the rain, which brings bone-dry soil to life, the earth is full of such proofs revealing the superior might and knowledge of God. The Qur'an refers to two important features that lead to these signs being deepened and understood: thinking deeply and possessing knowledge. In many of his verses, God wills us to think about the things he has created and thus to learn from and be advised by them. In the creation of the heavens and earth, and the alternation of the night and day, and the ships that sail the seas to people's benefit, and the water that God sends down from the sky, by which he brings earth to life when it was dead, and scatters about in it creatures of every kind, and the varying direction of the winds and the clouds subservient between heaven and earth, there are signs for people who use their intellect. All living and non-living things have been created in a way that is designed to encourage us to ponder his superior power of creation, art, and knowledge. Ignoring and failing to give these matters their due importance means turning one's back upon his verses, something that all believers must avoid. It is of great importance to constantly reflect on the proofs of God's creation in order to acquire a greater depth of contemplation. Verses refer to believers reflecting long and hard on the creation, for instance, of the earth and sky. In the creation of the heavens and earth, and the alternation of night and day, there are signs for people with intelligence. Those who remember God, standing, sitting, and lying on their sides, and reflect on the creation of the heavens and earth. Our Lord, you have not created this for nothing. Glory be to you. So safeguard us from the punishment of the fire. God has revealed that the signs leading to faith have a great significance for thinking people. However, the thinking referred to here does not consist of such cliched reactions as, "How splendidly God has created these," or "What a magnificent animal." We must think long and hard as well as deeply, in a wide-ranging manner, about what God has created, so that we can identify the wisdom and detail in that creation, and thus bear witness to his infinite knowledge, might, and artistry. Another astonishing example in comparison with modern-day technology is the water-carrying system in trees. Most people are unaware that a motor is necessary to raise water up to higher levels. Pressure tanks, for example, are used to raise water to the upper stories of city buildings. Trees also have to raise the water they obtain from the soil up to their highest levels. So how is it that water can be raised as much as 120 meters in some trees, as is the case with giant sequoias? Scientists proposed various theories as to how this process takes place. The mechanisms proposed by those theories that could be proven by experiments are to a large extent regarded as valid. The conclusion drawn by scientists as a result of all this endeavor is the flawless nature of the pressure tank system in trees. This incomparable water pumping system in tree trunks is just one of the proofs revealing to us the omniscience of its creator. It is God who has created this water-carrying system in trees, as he has everything else in the universe. Birds expend large amounts of energy in order to fly. They therefore require much more fuel and large quantities of oxygen with which to burn that fuel than all land or sea-dwelling creatures. Some migratory birds fly at very high altitudes. Geese, for example, can fly at 8,000 meters. Bearing in mind the fact that even at 5,000 meters, the atmosphere is 63% more dense than that of sea level, one can better comprehend the extraordinary nature of the altitudes achieved by geese. That is because a bird flying in such a rarefied atmosphere has to beat its wings very fast and consume considerable quantities of oxygen. Yet there is much less oxygen there than at sea level. So how is it that the birds are able to fly under such difficult conditions? Birds' lungs have been created so as to make the most effective use of oxygen. The lungs, which function in a very different way to those of mammals, allow birds to obtain more than normal levels of energy from the air. This matchless structure of the avian lung demonstrates the existence of a most perfect creation, intended to meet the need for high levels of oxygen essential for flight. It is clear that the avian lung is just one of the proofs that God has created living things.
I'm Yusuf Estes for Voice of Islam with tidbits about Islam, the trivia and the little snippets that kind of help you to understand more what Muslims are talking about when they say the words that they use from the Arabic language. Well, the word I want to talk about today is called taqwa. Taqwa. What is taqwa? What does it mean? Often we translate it to be a word in English which is God-fearing or piousness or righteousness, but in reality, I guess the God-fearing would be closer. But to be specific about it, it is to put a partition, a veil, a wall, or something between you and something else. Obviously, you could never do that between you and God. You can't put up a partition between you and God. You can see wherever you are, hears you wherever you are, knows wherever you are, so that's not the meaning. But to put a partition or a veil, a wall between you and the anger of Allah or the punishment of Allah. It means you will do the things that He wants you to do. And what is that? And He tells you to believe in Him and establish your worship and follow through with it. Let me give you something from the Qur'an in Arabic and translate it to help you understand. Here's what He says about the people before us. He said, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ دِينَ حُنَفَاءَ وَيُقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَذَلِكَ دِينُ الْقَيِّمَةِ. More or less the meaning to the English language is saying that the people before you were not ordered anything more than this: to worship Allah alone without any partners, in what we would call monotheism. Hunafa, Hanif means monotheism. and establish the regular worship called the salah, or connect, and to pay the zakah, the purification of the wealth. And this is the deen, the way most clear. Now, all of these words we've talked about in our little snippets that we do, we call it tidbits. But I hope this helped you to understand more what is taqwa. It's to fear God more than you fear what He created. And you will obey Him because you know that's the thing to do. You're going to do it sincerely. You're going to do it for His sake. And all of this, of course, adds up to another word, aslama, which is the root and foundation of the word Islam. So whoever has real taqwa is working for their establishment of their Islam, and they are the Muslims. All that you got in this little piece of tidbits on Voice of Islam. I'm Yusuf Estes. Until next time, salam. Peace.
Allah